Started here. Good afternoon. My name is Doug Lalone. Welcome to our webinar today called Bringing Manufacturing Back to Michigan, Reducing Further Supply Chain Disruption. We have some important panelists and guests with us here today. We'll introduce them here in a minute. Again, my name is Doug Lalone. I'm a patent attorney with the law firm of Fishman Stewart, located in Troy, Michigan. As a lawyer and an engineer, I help clients identify, secure, and advance the creative works of their clients. We have clients around the world. I've been practicing patent law about 29 years. This conversation today is not about intellectual property law, but it's about manufacturing in the supply chain. Hence the reason we have great experts here with us today. Our goal here today is to have a conversation about what's going on in Michigan manufacturing in the past quarter or so, as well as talk more importantly about our supply chain. I want to put up on the screen here a little slide to help facilitate the conversation here today as our guests continue to start rolling in. And we thank you for your attendance here today. Never before have we seen such an enormous pandemic related activity that's negatively impacting our supply chain. Companies are being tasked with solving many critical problems like fulfillment of demand, increased lead times, lack of flexibility, capacity issues, supplier shutdowns, and even more, all of which have led to a severe and widespread crisis in the chain supply. And we hope your company has weathered this storm quite well. On the screen, I'm broadcasting some information that was obtained through a Harvard Business Law Review article in March of this year. This screen shows a sampling of the world's largest 1,000 companies or their suppliers who own more than 12,000 facilities, factories, and other operations in COVID-19 quarantine areas. So this is a screenshot specifically focusing on these companies' operations in COVID-related areas, specifically China, Italy, and South Korea. Resiliency of the current supply chain has been challenged and many links have been broken and their weaknesses have been exposed. So, just how extensive this crisis is can be seen by this data that was released in the Harvard Review report by a company called ReSolink. They are a chain supply mapping and monitoring company. It shows the sites and industries quarantined specifically in areas of China and Korea. And as you can see from this illustration really drives home how dependent Michigan and other US manufacturers may have become dependent on China. You can see specifically how heavy they relied in the automotive sector. There are roughly 2,730 facilities. In the consumer goods sector, 1,139 facilities. High tech, 3,238 facilities, and life sciences at 1,562 facilities. So you can see that these manufacturing companies, based upon this poll, are heavily relied upon the China supply chain. So today's conversation is going to be about the benefits and challenges of the supply chain interruptions that's taken place here in the last few months. I'd like to now introduce our panelists, Dr. Ananth Iyer. Good morning, Dr. Iyer. Afternoon. Dr. Iyer is a Senior Associate Dean and Chair of Operations Management at the Krannert School of Management at Purdue University. Boiler up, my alma mater. Dr. Iyer's teaching and research interests operations and supply chain management. That's his specialty as a professor at the university. He also serves as the director of the Dauch Center for Management of Manufacturing Enterprises, as well as the Global Supply Chain Management Initiative. As some of you may know, Dick Dauch, who was the founder of American Axle, founded and funded the center of this center at Purdue several decades ago. John Walsh, good afternoon, John. John is the president and CEO of the Michigan Manufacturers Association. Congratulations, John. John, that's a new job for you as of January this year. Prior to leading the Michigan Manufacturers Association, John served as the Michigan State Budget Director for Michigan, where he was responsible for coordinating all aspects of the state's $57 billion budget. Prior to that, John served as the Director of Strategic Policy for Governor Snyder here in Michigan. And before that, he served 3 terms in the Michigan House of Representatives. John, thank you again for joining us today. And finally, we have Kal Beidas. Kal is the director of Worldwide Alliance Group. Kal has extensive experience in North America and in Asia in supply chain management, manufacturing operations, and leadership in various high-level manufacturing positions. Kal is a fellow engineer, and he has his engineering and MBA degrees from a University of Michigan. And Kal will be providing an interesting perspective from a manufacturer's perspective here regarding supply chain. Now, at the beginning of our different events here, I always like to host a quick poll. I'm going to launch a poll now, and I just like to take 1 more minute of our time before we get started here with our panelists and our various questions. If you would please, can the panelists see the poll on the screen? And you're able to take the poll yourself if you like. So we're getting results now, and I will broadcast the results here in about 30 seconds once we have a sufficient quorum that's responded to the survey. We found these surveys helpful over the years to try to give us immediate feedback about some of the conversation we're going to be having here in the next 30 minutes during our webinar today. All right, we're going to wait for a few more seconds for the results to come in. Interesting results that we're seeing here so far. Okay, we are almost at 50% capacity. I think we have enough here to conduct a reasonable little study. So I'm going to end the poll right now so we can move on to our first series of questions. And I'd like to share the results of the poll with our audience. Can everybody see the screen? Yes? Okay. First question was, has your supply chain been interrupted during the crisis? 69% said yes. It's nice to see that 31% were not impacted. Interrupted was the key term there. Question 2, has your supply chain recovered since the COVID? 31% yes, said yes. 69% said no. Looks like we have some work to do, right, John? With your audience, with your membership. And then 3, does your organization plan on changing its supply chain within the next year? 69% yes, 31% no. So, and the final question was a question just internally about actually conducting future surveys and webinars. So, with that thought in mind, let's get started with the top questions we have for our panelists here. Please, I think the panelists will need to unmute themselves when they get ready to talk here. And Dr. Iyer, I have the first question for you. Mm-hmm. And feel free for any of you to join in and answer some of these questions. The first question really are what are the challenges, what have they been with respect to, from a manufacturing standpoint, what other challenges been during the pandemic, and how did those interruptions in the supply chain impact the business from your perspective, from the companies that you've been involved with?
So Doug, first, thank you for the opportunity to chat, first be part of this panel, as well as talk to your membership. One way to sort of think about the challenge is to think about the demand side and the supply side. And on the supply side, the question really is availability of raw material, whether the goods can get here, and associated frictions with respect to delivery. So that side. The other part of the supply side is keeping all of the employees and the facilities functioning, taking care of people so infections don't spread, etc. Following the rules of whatever the rules are in governance where the location is. So that's on the supply side. On the demand side, there is the question that some industries saw very large increases in demand. The NPR had a list of increases in sales of toilet paper and sanitizer and nail polish and flour. So those things were growing 300 to 500%. So this is the challenge in the supply chain, differences across sectors, potential supply and demand worries. Now, here locally, we had an opportunity to chat with several small to medium-sized businesses. in January and February, we were in a very low unemployment situation where every employer was trying to hang on to every employee they had. So the initial reaction in March was really to take care of employees, and that came first. So if taking care of the employees required increasing shifts and de-densifying the plants, that's what people did. But as things moved along, the challenge became more financial. How do you keep the lights on? How do you synchronize the revenue side and the cost side? And that became the challenge. But most people were still focused on planning for recovery, keeping everybody connected in and keeping track of them. And everybody is still hopeful that that we're on the upswing. One of the things that I find, which I think is a great tribute to manufacturers in general, is running manufacturing plants is challenging. There are a lot of shocks that come in, and the executives and the people sort of handle that. I think that many plants figured out a way one way to think about this, as we've been thinking about, is to think about the product, process, people, and technology. And in that sequence, given the infections, people came first, and you had to adjust the product and the process and bring in the technology. So that's, I think, a quick summary of some of the things that we heard from manufacturers and the challenges they face.
Interesting. I suspect, John, from your perspective, as the president and chair, CEO of the Michigan Manufacturers Association, I'm sure you've heard a lot of things and saw a lot of challenges with the supply chain and the various manufacturers in Michigan. Could you just first start off, tell the audience briefly, what is the Michigan Manufacturers Association? Who are its members? And then can you give us a little overview of some of the challenges you saw with some of your members of the Michigan Manufacturing Association?
Sure, and thanks, Doug, as well for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. The MMA has just under 2,000 members. We represent all sectors of manufacturing, so aerospace, automotive, of course, heavy here in Michigan, but we also have agricultural, manufacturing, and food production, and packaging, healthcare. So we cover defense. We have members in all areas of that. I'd say about 80% of our members are 100 employees or less. We have everything from 20 employees to over 10,000. We're glad to have every one of them, the large and the small, but most are our smaller members, and they're making a widget for somebody. Generally, they're in someone's supply chain for the most part, regardless of the industry. And the biggest challenge in Michigan was we were different than most states, not all, but most. We were trying to walk a line between essential and non-essential workplaces. And our members were able to make an argument that they were essential in all cases. They had worldwide demand for their products, but we couldn't produce because our definition of essential was different than somewhere else. So that was the biggest first challenge. And the thought that was stated by Dr. Iyer just a moment ago, people were focused on their people. Our employers were focused on their employees and keeping them safe. Some had experience overseas already dealing with COVID. We were still learning a lot, but they were already implementing some procedures. But we had to first decide with our members who should stay open and who shouldn't. The next challenges came with the financial. How do you apply for the payroll protection plan? What does it mean to put your employees on unemployment? How can you prepare your plant while you're down for the future? Trying to follow CDC and OSHA guidelines. So those were the biggest. As it progressed, Michigan went a little bit longer, so we had that unusual definition, and we carried our shutdown a little bit longer than other states. And our members of all sizes were getting letters from their final customers saying, we expect you to deliver, fill in the blank. So it was a little tense, but the governor reacted, understood what the tension was, and we were able to open all manufacturing back up in May. The problem then turned to being safe and productive at the same time.
Interesting. It's good to hear how your organization has pivoted and helped out, sounds like thousands of manufacturing companies in Michigan, and of all walks of life, of all different sizes, and across many different platforms. It's good to see how you responded. And it's great that the Michigan Manufacturing Association was there.
It was busy, and we decided to open up all of our resources to members and non-members during the period.
Yeah.
The other thing that we did, Doug, is we reached out to the Michigan Chamber and Detroit Regional Chamber, some of the other largest business groups, and we stand together with them because we felt at this point in time a unified business voice was more important than each of us chasing down membership. So we spent a lot of time together working together.
Yeah, well, thanks for helping out the manufacturing community. We appreciate that. I'd like to pivot now and talk to Kal for a minute. Kal has experience in running manufacturing enterprises in Michigan and outside of Michigan. He has overseas experience of supplying products from China and sourcing those products into U.S. manufacturing operations and the whole gamut there. So, Kal, the conversation here I'd like to turn to now is really focused on what are the benefits of redirecting our supply chain back to Michigan. What are your thoughts on what are the key benefits? If we could accomplish that, what would be the benefits of that?
Yeah, and Doug, thanks for having me here as well. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel, and this is a very timely discussion regarding reshoring our supply chain here to the United States, and I know in this particular case we're talking about Michigan. You know, there's a lot going on even prior to the pandemic. You know, we had the Section 301 tariffs that went into effect. We had the Section 232 tariffs that went into effect. There was a lot of friction going on between the United States and China that began to create some complexities in terms of pricing. And then on top of that, we had the pandemic, which hit us this year. In terms of manufacturing, companies that have their supply chain based out of the US did not experience the same level of disruption as companies that had global supply chains. Particularly in China. When China got hit with the pandemic towards the end of last year, they completely shut down and quarantined the affected cities to isolate and contain the situation. In terms of the impact here to U.S. manufacturers, and what I would say long-term strategic decisions. There is currently serious debate, and I think there's going to be some serious action taken to really reconsider reshoring operations from China. You know, who knows if the Section 301 tariffs are going to go away anytime soon. At this point, it's an unknown. And I think that with automation becoming more prominent, the labor arbitrage with low-cost country manufacturing is slowly diminishing, and the benefit is just not there. So, you know, ultimately, you're going to see some what I would call shortening of supply chains. I don't know if that really necessarily means bringing it here to Michigan. It could very well also mean bringing it to taking it down to Mexico, for example. But there will be some shifts going on in the supply chain moving forward.
Right. And while you're on the same topic, Kal, my question was talking about the benefits. Is there a downside of trying to onshore maybe certain sectors or certain industries? And can we even do that given our labor situation? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So prior to the there's always a benefit to having a shorter supply chain, always. The ability to have shorter lead times is a big plus. That means you hold less inventory, less working capital, and that's a financial benefit to a company. The downside has always been cost. That's really the only reason companies seek to establish operations in low-cost countries. The downside is going to continue to be costs. You know, companies are going to have to balance what's important to them and what's important to their customers. In the automotive industry, pricing is extremely sensitive. You know, you can win or lose contracts on pennies, and Like I can give you an example where we lost the business over 8 cents, to a competitor. So it's very sensitive. So companies are always looking for the best ways to optimize their cost structure. But the downside is the cost. So it's balancing, lead time to versus cost of production. So and here, we have this pandemic. I know that this topic is kind of coming up, in terms of companies that did have a U.S. supply chain. Are they going to be as affected, or were they as affected by those companies that had a global supply chain? I mean, the fact of the matter is if you had a U.S. supply chain, you were better off. But the question is what are the chances of having another COVID-19 situation in the immediate future? So that's a topic of debate at this point.
Right. John, I wanted to piggyback on the same conversation about the benefits of redirecting the supply chain back to Michigan in particular. Are you hearing anything from your manufacturing members regarding redirecting the supply chain or fixing the supply chain to avoid the current interruptions? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we are. We're hearing it on a regular basis to take a look at to shorten the supply chain. They call it regional supply chains, a little more certainty. So that is a conversation amongst our members. Some are sensitive because they need to be assured of products arriving. Others are sensitive because they were at that short end of the stick where we couldn't produce for a little while under the rules that were applicable to us. So we have a lot of sensitivity to the issue. It's also a national issue. The National Association of Manufacturers is working with Congress and the U.S. Senate to talk about perhaps some programming to bring more supply chain work here in critical industries. It might be pharmaceutical, defense industry. Certainly PPE represents a fantastic opportunity for us. While we're seeing a peak in demand right now because we're in the middle of this pandemic, we think there will be an ongoing demand for PPE, and that represents good opportunity for Michigan manufacturers to diversify and move into that field.
Okay. Interesting. So it sounds like there could be some opportunities there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Dr. Iyer, speaking of opportunities, typically I would, when I'm talking to somebody manufacturing and they're sourcing abroad, they're talking about lead time, quality, and price. Those are the key things here. Kal talked about the price of losing out projects over merely 8 cents per unit. So obviously suppliers have to balance that. My question for you is a little different balancing act. Do you think in your involvement with different manufacturers and your different studies across the different platforms, are there any industries that may be better suited to bring back manufacturing to, let's say, the Midwest? Are any that we really should look at and you think that's what we really want to bring back to the United States?
So I think one way to think about this is by first starting with the demand side. So products for which there's a lot of demand variability because the drivers of demand are not well understood. Several years ago, for example, there were various statements that Whirlpool was moving a lot of manufacturing to the US. And if you asked why, it's because if you now go to a hardware store and you're looking at front loading versus top loading versus side loading washing machines, there was a lot of uncertainty what people were preferring. One was supposed to be more, conserving more water, the other. So whenever you have uncertainty in demand, having shorter lead times has a huge benefit. So that's one. The second is the greater the level of customization of the end product, the greater the need to sort of be on top of things and synchronize the back end. And the third, something that you're an expert on, Doug, is if there is intellectual property and serious intellectual property involved, you've got to protect that carefully. So to me, those are the industries. And the natural set of companies, and I know that John just mentioned pharmaceutical, defense, etc. These are classic industries where there is a critical need, there is IP, etc. But I would not count out other industries. And these are industries where the decision regarding reshoring should be part of a strategy regarding how you're going to compete. So if you're going to compete with greater personalization, and if you're going to now start getting to customers who don't see their needs met, you'll need to be a lot more flexible. So US facilities that are a lot more flexible, that have a greater degree of automation, that can jump and respond faster, that are agile, those are the facilities we need. Now, and the reason I say that is those are the facilities that can deliver more value and therefore pay all their employees a lot better, because in this calculus, we do need to see to it that, I mean, the US is a wealthy country with a high standard of living, and that standard of living should be protected for everybody. The only way we can do that is by doing things that are high value added. So I really see existing industries. John already mentioned defense, pharmaceutical, etc. Aerospace is a very significant US industry, but I can see newer industries coming in that actually move towards being more value added, more complicated, leveraging technology. And that's the opportunity for reshoring.
That's a great explanation. So it sounds like high value added manufacturing would be a key area for us to focus on. If we, obviously we're doing that already, but focusing on that so that we can provide higher paying jobs and continue our high standard of living in the United States. John, what do you think about that? What do you think from the standpoint of the type of manufacturing maybe Michigan manufacturers could focus on? Are there any others that stand out to you? Sounds like high value manufacturing would be a key area for us to look at.
I appreciate the comments, Dr. Iyer. I think that's really wise, very perceptive. I was so focused on industry-specific comments that we've been hearing. But as part of a business plan, as we try to advise members in the state on where, look, incentives are not likely given the state's economic situation, but there are things that they can do to help invite businesses to move here. Being broader in our scope, I think that's some wise advice learned today, is working with our members and trying to, regardless of their industry, have them focus on stressing the importance of having a supplier nearby for all the reasons mentioned. So Doug, I don't have a specific answer, to broaden to other industries. I just liked the answer I just heard. I think that's something that we'll incorporate in our own messaging to our members.
Right, excellent, thank you for that. We have a couple questions in our chat room. Can our panelists see that? And I think I'd like to transition into the one of the questions that's posted by one of our viewers. And their comment is, companies will be going from China to Mexico, and Mexico will be the winner because of cost. I'm talking with some of our friends in manufacturing. They talk about how Mexico has built these trade schools. They've come to America and they've hosted American companies to attract them to go to Mexico and to set up their facilities. They've been very successful in accomplishing that. So I have a general question for you, and that is, and Kal, I'll tee this up for you. Do you think that Mexico is going to be the winner, maybe re-onshoring to the Americas and bringing things from China?
Yes, I think they're going to benefit from the reshoring process. U.S. also is going to benefit from this, but Mexico is going to benefit as well. It all comes back to what Dr. Ayers has just kind of alluded to. We want to focus on some of the more advanced concepts, where, especially particularly where IP, is something that we really want to protect here in the U.S. A lot of the jobs that we're going to be able to reshore, and when I say reshore, I'm kind of talking about it's not NAFTA now, it's the what is it called? The Canadian, American, Mexican trade agreement. So anyways, the current NAFTA, Mexico is going to certainly benefit because the reshoring of stuff that, that we would consider not so high tech, there's going to be a substantial cost savings to doing so. First and foremost, you avoid the Section 301 tariffs, the 25% tariffs that companies are having to pay to import from China. So Mexico is definitely going to benefit from this, particularly because of their investment in trade labor. This is one area where in the United States, if you talk to a lot of executives, we struggle to find the highly skilled labor on the production lines. And I think that the states are doing a great job. I know the state of Michigan has invested considerably in expanding the training programs here in collaboration with community colleges, but we're still short on the skilled labor side of things. So Mexico's going to benefit, and hopefully, and I'm sure, the U.S. will benefit as well as a result of the reshoring initiative.
Thank you, Kal. I'd like to ask the same question of Dr. Iyer. Do you think Mexico's going to benefit from re-onshoring activities to bring things back from Europe and or from China? And if not, why not?
So I think the first thing to note is everybody is trying to get to US demand. So the customers are in the US. So the first group that will benefit is US customers. So I want us to be focused on that, because they're the people providing the money. So whatever we do, they have to benefit. And anything that just causes them to pay more is not going to help anybody. Now, the question that I would ask is, can they be served better? And will they care about where the manufacturing happens? And to me, if the customers start caring about where the manufacturing happens, the manufacturing will happen in the US. So I'll give you an example of some companies that we hear about. So think about Tesla, for example. Over and over again, we're told where it's being made. We're seeing pictures of the robots, etc. Nobody's talking about Tesla moving overseas. If they produce in China, it's for the Chinese market. If they produce in Germany, it's for the German market. So I really think it's a question, and this is something, look, all my life I've been involved in studying manufacturing and I love it, but I really want the customers to feel the same, interest in where is my product made? Who are the people making my product? And the moment we can get that to happen. Now, in today's reality, some of it you might classify as naive. But I would argue that with all the new technologies coming in, with 3D printing and robotics and all of these things, it is quite possible that if you take into account manufacturing that satisfies global laws, the US might very well be the lowest cost manufacturer. Okay? It is true that there is manufacturing taking place, which is lower cost, in which some laws are being broken. So if we insist on all the laws being followed, and if we have the right training and the adoption of the technology, I think there'll be entire classes of products for which the US could be the worst, lowest cost manufacturer. We're seeing it locally in some companies that have invested in a lot of automation, and they've managed to literally become the world's lowest cost supplier. And I think that once you are in that position, leveraging automation, no manufacturer needs to worry about competition. I'm very bullish on competition. I think that makes us all better off. And I think any solution that protects you from that, they should protect you from, it should ensure fair competition. But once there's fair competition, competition brings out the best athletes, the best NBA players, we're proud of them. And that's because they compete so vehemently. And I really think that the manufacturers we have throughout the country have that capability. They just need fair competition and enough incentives for them to adopt automation. Therefore, they can create greater value added. At least just a few comments on that dimension.
Yeah. Well, both you and Kal had talked about intellectual property and fair competition, so I thought I'd just chime in for a second on that. Obviously, having patents protecting the manufacturing process or the actual end product, U.S. patent law, of course, protects and gives the patent owner monopoly to exclude others from making, using, and selling that process or practicing that process or the actual device itself. So that is one competitive advantage one would have for re-onshoring and keeping the manufacturing here. You can basically build a monopoly around it and protect it and keep others from trying to ship it and bring competing products back into the United States. So there are some advantages of using the patent system to help protect these new innovations that maybe may come about as a result of the high value added technologies that you're talking about. There's an interesting question in the chat room I'd like to pose to John, if I could. Now, John, you oversaw the $57 billion budget by the state of Michigan. You're very well informed about the different programs that the state of Michigan may have to help provide incentives to have Michigan manufacturers actually compete, make, use, and sell products in Michigan. I suspect, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's probably not much money in the budget for providing incentives to bring manufacturing here right now, especially with what's going on. But there's an interesting question by one of the attendees here, and she's asking, are there grants companies can apply for to bring business back to the United States? And I'll ask specifically Michigan, if you know of any. And they state a scenario there about they source large amounts of castings from China, and reshoring those castings due to the mold investment costs would be very expensive here, versus obviously molds are much more inexpensive in China. So are there any financial incentives the government provides for re-onshoring some of these activities here?
The short answer is not yet, not anything significant. At the federal level, conversations are beginning, but my expectation is Congress and the president will first look at the next package of CARES. You know, they're already underway. That's going to take up a little bit of time, whether or not there'll be another stimulus. I don't think we'll have a serious conversation about the onshoring, reshoring until perhaps after the election, maybe even into the new year. Now that said, it's going to be difficult either at the federal or state level to come up with significant financial resources unless the feds just keep adding to the debt. You know, we've borrowed about $6 trillion just in the last 4 months on top of $21 trillion in debt. You know, at some point in time, we're gonna have to wise up. We did what we had to do. I'm not complaining, but at some point you're just not able to continue to issue debt to do things. At the state level, all the states are suffering horribly. Somewhere between 20 and 30% of their income is off moving into the next year. So where we'll have to look, what we're going to be doing with our legislature and the governor is talk about tax incentives. Perhaps there's land that's available that the state might own, or a county, or even a city might own, that can be repurposed for as an attractive item for somebody that wants to come back into Michigan. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to focus on. The short answer is simply at the present time there are no financial resources to bring back companies, or not a whole company, but their manufacturing effort.
Right, and there's a follow-up question I'll just pose to you as well, John, before we move on. That was just posted. It says the government could play a future role in bringing suppliers back, but Mexico and China, the governments know how to do this, but the United States and Canada does not yet know. Would you agree with them, with that statement by the
That's a complicated question. We could have another seminar. You know, I'd have to put on 3 different hats: budget director, economic development, and manufacturing. I'll just tell you this: we'd love to bring as much work here to Michigan as possible, but that's a true statement. But another true statement is we fully support a worldwide economy. To Dr. Iyer's point earlier, our customers are going to demand cheap quality products and continue to do so. They may or may not want to pay the extra freight if there is extra freight. So we have to balance that. I can't speak so much to Canada and Mexico and their programs, but I will tell you there are other states that do better than Michigan, much better in attracting businesses. Some spend a little too much. Others spend just the right amount, or they provide other incentives. We really could be better, but we're just not. We have not been inclined that way. I'll end my comment there.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I appreciate the candor. We're coming up to our last round of questions, and Kal, I'm going to pass the baton to you next. And the question really is about, is the supply chain really going to change? You know, we've been through 3-4 months of the pandemic. It's forced a lot of changes. But looking out, say 6 months to 12 months in the future here, do you think anything's really going to change with the supply chain? And if not, what should Michiganders be doing to try to improve the supply chain? I know that's a big question, but what do you think?
No, it's a good question, and you know, without a doubt, there's going to be structural changes to the supply chain. You know, I could tell you that this has been in motion for about 2 or 3 years since Section 301 was imposed. Many manufacturers here in the U.S. they began to look at Thailand and Vietnam as a way to avoid the Section 301 tariffs. They started to jump on that wagon. And then they realized the labor just wasn't there. And then on top of that, the bigger players, the larger companies were consuming all the resources. So the smaller, mid-sized players they just couldn't figure out how to navigate it, and got into a heap of trouble on that front. And now, we had this pandemic, which just shed another light and on the risks of having a long supply chain. Things are going to change. How it's going to look like, I think that we have to. It's a wait and see mode. I don't think anyone. And I know there's a lot of folks talking that they might change the supply chain within the next year. It really depends. If you're talking automotive, it's very complex to change your supply chain within 6 months. I mean, there's it's a long process. It's risky. It's got to be conducted in a very controlled manner. If you're talking about commodity products that goes to Home Depot, nuts and bolts, yeah, that you can do in a fairly short period of time. So it really depends. But to answer your question, are supply chains going to change? Yes, I think that's just a natural byproduct of the changes happening in China. And not necessarily just because of the tariffs and the pandemic, but also their evolution and their advancements in technology and the fact that they don't really want to be the lowest cost supplier in the world anymore. So a lot going on, but it's a wait and see mode for the time being.
Right. Interesting. Thank you, Kal. Dr. Iyer, what do you think? Do you think the supply chain is really going to change in view of what we've just experienced here, second quarter 2020?
So I think one of the words that a lot of people are looking at is the word building a resilient supply chain. So how do you absorb shocks? And so the immediate need, I think, is a lot of people thinking about dual sourcing, having a fallback plan. So if you have friction, if you have a problem, what do you do? So in all conversations that we're looking at, there are many OEMs thinking about dual sourcing, whereby a local supplier can be plan B. Okay, they can be the second. That could get started right away. I mentioned earlier, and I've mentioned again, along with my colleagues at the Manufacturing Center, we've been thinking about this with what we call a TP3 strategy. And the reason I mentioned that is technology and adoption of technology, and I don't mean capital equipment. I think about what might be called smart manufacturing these days, which is augmented reality and 3D printing and cobots and all internet sensors, etc. To me, that's a layer which is coming on top of manufacturing that's going to permit more complexity without an increase in costs. And that is the sweet spot where I see tremendous opportunity. But doing that would require thinking about the ecosystem. It will require thinking about the people, products, processes, and leveraging technology. To me, that's a wonderful opportunity. So we're very bullish on that aspect of it. And it might be one of those cases where all of Silicon Valley will come trooping here into the Midwest, wanting to basically say, what can we do for you? Of course, you know why they're doing that. But it's also an opportunity to bring back this interest in the best talent considering going to manufacturing. So if we can get the next generation of employees to get really enthusiastic about creating products and leveraging technology, many other things fall into place. When you have talented, driven employees wanting to leverage technology, and where creating products is regarded as a very fulfilling occupation, many other things fall into place. Now, look, we as educators, I'm an educator, I try to do that in my classes, but as they hear from great examples of such leveraging of technology, I think that's what we need. And I'm really looking forward to that happening. And I'm hoping some part of it comes now as we're recovering to the new normal.
Interesting. So an interesting takeaway there is building a resilient supply chain. That seems to be a key theme. And Kal's conversation about shortening the supply chain and how that impacts the system, that's going to be advantageous to the manufacturing community. John, I'm going to let you have the last word. You think the Michigan supply chain in the manufacturing setting is really going to change coming out of this COVID crisis?
I agree. I think it will, and it'll be for the reasons that we've discussed, and the solutions will be that regional or shortened supply chain, the resilient double sourcing, if you will. But also, I think we're going to see a lot more. Automation was already underway. It's going to accelerate. One of the demands we're hearing from some of our smallest is for more information on Industry 4.0. They knew it was out there. They know that it's coming, but in a traditional sense, the larger companies will invest first, and over time, they'll insist on the smaller suppliers to do the same. Right now, we're feeling pressure to increase automation, not get to what's the phrase that people are using, the dark shop that will operate on its own, but to get to a point where resiliency can come from some greater automation.
Interesting. Great words, great words. Those are good parting thoughts. I want to thank our panelists here, Dr. Iyer, John Walsh from the Michigan Manufacturing Association, Kal. Thank you. Appreciate your time today. This has been a very informative conversation about our supply chain and what we can do and expect in Michigan as well as a country, and the challenges and benefits that we may be experiencing from that as we move forward. So thank you everybody for your participation today. I want to thank the attendees for their great questions that's in the chat line. This is all I have for now. This is Doug Alone signing off from you from Fishman Stewart, patent firm in Troy, Michigan. We thank our panelists, and everybody have a great and safe day.